Hi, I'm Nick Feldman of Wang Chung
And I'm Jack Hues, and you are listening to Grooves on the Record.
on 94.7 The Pulse.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Variety Show with Liam, Season 3, Episode 5. And it is my greatest honor to introduce you two amazing men from the 1980s who are a part of the amazing band Wang Chung, Jack Hues, and Nick Feldman. How are you both today?
I'm well. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm
How are you, Nick?
better than I expected, so I'm all right.
That's
If I say
great.
anything weird, because I had slight sedation earlier on today, so if I start saying some really weird stuff, Jack, just kind of jump in there and correct me.
I would do, yeah.
Yeah.
But you often
Yeah.
have sedation about midday, don't you?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, me and Jack were just touching on the remasters that you guys are bringing out. You're finally going back to the start of Wang Chung, Wang Chung, and you're pretty much going through the entire catalog and remastering that. So, what has it been like going back to those first few albums, redoing those albums, and pretty much just like remastering them clean? How's the process been since 2019? It's been that long.
Yeah, it has been a long time. We've sort of worked on the Wang Chung album a little bit. And what was interesting there was I managed to get hold of the original multi-tracks, and looking through that, well, rather listening through to that stuff, I found some versions of tracks that didn't end up on the album that we started to record but never really finished. So I've done some mixes of those. I think even the most what should we say, avid collector of Wang Chung stuff. In fact, there's two guys in the States, Kent Marquardt and Brian Ware, and even they don't have these tracks. So there will be something new for everybody on these reissues.
It's been really fun finding these old tracks, and Jack did a couple of mixes on a couple of them, which sound great actually. So it's almost like, wow, we were kind of better than I thought we were back then. So it's been a good process.
Yeah, of course. The only singles or even stuff that I have from that era are the two Australian sleeve pressings of Hold Back the Tears and China.
Yeah.
So I found these at a vintage market one day. I was like, there's no way these are from the first album and they're Australian press, because anything that's pressed in Australia is either promo or doesn't even have the picture sleeve. It's all company sleeve stuff. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
So it just shows how like under the radar you guys were before you guys really took off a year or so later.
Yeah.
So
we tried not to be under the radar, but we were more under the radar than we planned to be. But it's nice all this stuff floating around and people seem really interested in it.
Yeah.
So Points on the Curve is kind of now celebrating its 40 years, depending on which region of the world you're living in. Luckily for us in Australia, those 40 years come up now, as the album was released in 1983, 40 years ago. So
yeah, amazing. Yeah,
it's phenomenal. The album that really started it all for both you guys, and of course Darren as well, who obviously is not part of the band anymore, but still has links here and there with some of the tracks, as Jack mentioned, were written by you guys back when you first met in like 1977, if I'm correct.
That's when Nick and I first met. I think, 78, I think it was, and Darren was a little later. Yeah.
Okay. So
Darren was that. We were in this rehearsal room in the East End of London, in Bethnal Green, and next door to us was another band called Blue Wind, and they just played the most incredible intensity. They almost sort of blew the wall down in between the two rehearsal rooms. And every day we kept hear this incredible noise coming through, and so we sort of eventually became friendly with them. And in that band was the rhythm section was Darren Costin on drums and Lee Gorman, who went on to be in Bow Wow Wow. He was on bass, and the sort of energy coming through, it was kind of jazz rock, but it played at sort of high sort of tempo and maximum sort of energy, youthful energy. So we ended up, but that's where we kind of became friends with Darren and Lee, and ended up playing in a band together. We kind of stole them and formed another band called 57 Men. Yeah, but that's a whole other story.
Very interesting indeed. Noticing the set list recently, you've actually given a bit of love to the first album with The Half-Hearted Way finally making its way back. So amazing that you're finally, taking notice on that album and just bringing more of that stuff out. Will there be more songs coming back? Because I know City of the Angels returned for the first time from the Live and Die in LA original soundtrack. Has there been any other considerations of other songs not played yet?
We've been discussing various things. There's nothing. I don't think we're going to be doing anything new other than City of the Angels. We may get to play a few times on the upcoming tour, but necessarily that tour is kind of playing the hits. So we have to stick to a fairly tight format on that. But next year we want to do some gigs which will headline, and that will give us more scope to open up and bring up new repertoire. And certainly there's a few tracks on Wang Chung that could do with an airing, and all stuff. We've got quite a big catalogue these days.
Yeah, we've been talking about doing Eyes of the Girl, actually. That not from Wang Chung, that's from Mosaic, which we'd never ever played live before. So maybe we'll get around to doing that next year sometime.
Yeah.
That would be cool to see. Any returning tracks like Don't Be My Enemy? That hasn't been seen since Points of the Curve era. That'd be cool to see come back.
Yeah, that'd be cool, Yeah.
So
it's an opportunity to sort of go a bit deeper cuts and play stuff we've never played before or not for years. So it should be fun. So next year, definitely we're going to dip our toe into that particular water.
Okay. Yeah. That'd be cool to note. I think a story that you've said many times, or I think people, especially on this podcast, would like to hear the story of Dancehall Days, because that was a pretty big hit when it comes to Australian charts. So what is the story behind such an iconic song?
Well, I guess that was written at a time when we released the Wang Chung album, and as you were pointing out, it was pretty much under the radar, much to the record company's disappointment, So I think they wanted us to do another album, but Nick and I both got that it was not exactly Last Chance Saloon, but definitely when you're signed to a label, there's a game to be played, and the game is having hit records, basically. So you got to shape up, So I think that was probably at the back of my mind a bit when I wrote Dancehall Days, but I recall that I wrote it when at the time I was sort of earning a bit of money teaching guitar in a couple of schools in Southeast London where I was living at the time. And some kid didn't show up for their lesson one day, and I can remember sort of coming up with the initial ideas of Dancehall Days. Take me baby by the hand, and the three chords, and I guess I wrote a good chunk of it in that 20 minutes that I was sort of sitting around waiting for the next kid to come for a guitar lesson, And I think when you're doing that stuff, I wasn't aware that wow, this is going to be life changing, But I sort of probably over a month or so worked on it and played it to Nick, and he was like, "Well, this is good, yeah," And we sort of chiseled away at it a bit and got it to a good shape. Did a demo of it, and suddenly people were being really nice to us. And, I remember our publishers taking us out to dinner, which they'd never done before, And it was all a bit more kind of in those days. I think it was easier to tell what a hit record was, And they sort of recognize that, So just to sort of finish the story off, we at the time we were signed with Arista, and we did a version of Dancehall Days under their aegis, as it were, with a producer called Tim Freeze Green, who's better known for his work with Talk Talk.
Yes, love that band.
Me too, and I love the later albums they did and his contributions to that. But at the time, his contribution to Dancehall Days was, I'd say, willfully quirky, should we say, and we were pretty happy with that, and I think sort of fate took over in a sense, in that we changed our management, and he strongly advised us to change labels, and how we did it I don't know, but he managed to talk Arista into ditching that version of the track and letting us have the rights to the song, because they could easily have been sticky about that. But they were more gentlemanly days.
It was more than that. It was more getting us out of the contract. I mean, I think, as Jack said, we're in the last chance saloon. I think that's with Arista. I think that's putting it mildly. I think we were really in trouble. I think they were, when we recorded Dancehall Days, I think they could smell potential here, but I think they'd lost quite a lot of confidence in the band. So they were a bit umming and ahhing about whether it actually was going to be a hit. And so that's when David Massey, our new manager, sort of came and played it to Geffen Records in America. And John Kolodner, who was the A&R guy who signed us, had actually seen us play a couple of years before, just before we signed to Arista, but had felt that we weren't really ready to be signed. So had passed. But when he heard the demo of Dancehall Days, then I think that was like all the ducks lined up. And I think he felt that we were ready to be signed. And David did a brilliant job of basically helping us pay off Arista, get ourselves out of the contract and sign to Geffen. And it was amazing. I mean, suddenly from sort of Last Chance Saloon to a whole different setup was very exciting. And Dancehall Days, I think, was the key that unlocked it.
It stays on to be quite an iconic song, still played to this day on like major flashback FMs and even mentioned in media as well. One of my favorite moments that used it was back in the early seasons of Top Gear when the boys were on a radio station. They referenced that song and they played it live on air.
Cool.
Yeah, still gets loads of play and gets used in loads of TV shows and commercials, and it's very active still. It's great.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite songs from the Points on the Curve album is The Waves. What was the inspiration behind The Waves? Like, talk me through it.
I think that was a song where the part of it was our sax player at the time, Dave Burnand, he was active on the Wang Chung album. He wasn't so much on Points on the Curve. I think by that time he'd sort of got bored sitting around waiting for me and Nick to kind of figure out what we were doing, So it was just a sort of funk riff, really. And I guess I got the lyrics from the book by Virginia Woolf called The Waves, which I just sort of skimmed through. I tend to be a bit of a what's the word? I was going to say vampire, but that's not quite what I mean. But it's what do they say? Sort of mediocre artists borrow, real artists steal, or something like that. Picasso said that, and 10,000 other people who thought they were artists, But I definitely nicked the title and probably some of the ideas, So
yeah, I think that song actually, I think Darren was the origin of that song musically. He came up with the basic beat, I think, didn't he? And some of the chords, and then we sort of we kind of developed it, and then Jack wrote the lyrics and turned it into a proper song.
And I think the arrangement, like a lot of Points on the Curve, came in the studio, didn't it, with Chris and Ross? Yeah. Those kind of particularly, what should we say, 80s keyboard sounds, that
yeah.
Would have been quite
there was a B-side to one of the singles that was The Waves, but without the vocal. So it's just an instrumental with Mel Collins, the sax player, just sort of noodling over the top, which is actually a really nice kind of moody, groovy track that we should probably do something with at some time. But yeah.
Well, I'm sure that'll be on the reissues, but that is delightful because we got him in to play on a bunch of things. He played the sax on Dancehall Days and stuff, and because that had a sort of jazzy feel, The Waves. I think we just let him do a couple of passes all the way through the track, and then you sort of tend to like take that bit and that bit, and but yeah, actually just listening to his work on it is really great.
Also, Mel Collins went on to work at Dire Straits live as well. 84 it was 83, sorry, on the Love Over Gold tour, and obviously is now for most of his life been with King Crimson. So
that's right. Well, he was.
Yeah.
I think that was before he was in King Crimson. You know, back in the day, back in the early days of Crimson, wasn't he? So we were Crimson fans. So to have him, and he also played in a band called Kokomo, who was like a band that never really broke through properly in the UK, but for a good kind of interesting funk sort of soul band. Played the clubs around the UK. I was really into them. So to have Mel Collins, you know, playing with us was a real vibe.
that's nice. I just did an interview just before this one with Pat Mustelwater, who's been on the more recent albums with them. So a lot of knowledge information about King Crimson, and also a big fan. I had a lot of respect for Bill Bruford as well when he joined in the 90s, as anyone would.
Yes,
I love his work. Love his autobiography. That's a book worth reading for anyone who wants a bit of inside track on, especially the difference between working in the jazz field and working with rock bands, you know, which is something I've experienced over the more recent past, you know.
Yeah. So we move a couple of years. Darren's left, and now you guys are wanting to get involved with movie scores. So you reach out in 1985 to do To Live and Die in LA, which still remains one of my favorite albums you guys ever did. So what made you want to become scorers, just essentially like that, to like work and produce your music for movies?
Well, I guess it sort of came to us, really. It wasn't like we were, as you're putting it, sort of thinking, oh, let's do a movie score. Who can we rope in? You know, we were at a point where we'd done, you know, Points on the Curve. We'd had a proper hit with Dance All Days, but it wasn't a #1 record, you know. And so there was a sense that we needed to sort of nail it, if you like, you know. And we were in the studio with Chris Hues. I think Ross was working on it as well. But it wasn't going terribly well. I certainly was writing all my usual arty-farty stuff, you know, and I don't think it was connecting. And Nick was doing his thing, but it wasn't, I don't know, wasn't gelling together. And suddenly we got this phone call from Bill Friedkin. William Friedkin, he directed The French Connection and The Exorcist, for people who don't recognize the name, and went on to have, you know, an amazing career. And he had basically done this movie called To Live and Die in LA. He called us, I think, when the movie was pretty much, he'd shot it all, I think. And I always got the sense that maybe he tried a sort of more normal Hollywood score person, but that for day to day, like, you know, he'd shoot a whole lot of stuff for a day and then watch the movie, the rushes, as they call it, back, and he'd play Wait from Points on the Curve in the background to sort of give the musical atmosphere. And I think that just sort of stuck in his head. So when he called us up, he sort of explained that, and he said, I just need a load more music like Wait, basically, you know. And it transpired that at that time, I was trying to write another Wait type song. You know, I probably write, you know, sort of 3 or 4 different types of song. I just repeat them over and over again. And one of those songs is a fast tempo with slow moving chords over the top. So Wait is that. And City of the Angels was part 2 of Wait, as it were. So we sort of worked on that. And also, you know, Geffen weren't that keen on us doing a movie soundtrack. They thought it was a distraction from the main task of writing a #1 hit, you know. But again, David stepped in, our manager, David Massey, and managed to persuade them to give us a week in a studio to do it. So we were under a lot of pressure to get quite a lot of music recorded and out there in a week, you know, given that Points on the Curve had taken 9 or 10 months to record easily, best part of a year. And we had like a week to do this next thing, you know. But I guess, well, maybe Nick should take over. But it's you know, we did all the soundtrack stuff, but and sent it over to Friedkin.
Yeah, I mean, what was so great for us is, you know, we're under that pressure, you know, from the record company to come up with some hits, to get on with our pop career, and so this distraction, as they saw it, was actually a godsend, because it was very exciting to be working with someone like Friedkin, to be doing. What was great about it was that Friedkin wanted an instrument. He didn't want songs. He didn't want short pop songs. The opposite. He wanted longer form, sort of instrumental music, you know, with of a gritty sort of nature. So literally almost diametric opposite to what we'd been trying to do in the studio. So it was really, it was the most brilliant kind of release for us out of that creative release and a very stimulating one. So once we'd sort of delivered that music to Freakin, he just loved it so much. And then it was to the point where he even wanted to cut some of the film to the music, you know, as opposed to the other way around. And I think that's when Jack, even though he didn't want songs, Jack decided to write a song called "To Live and Die in LA." I think just came out spontaneously, didn't it? So we demoed that together, and then we sent it off to Freakin. There we go. Freakin loved it, and so to the point where even though he'd asked us not to write any songs, I think he actually shot a scene to sort of to use for that particular song. But I think what happened with the record company, with Geffen, to have a sort of title track to a forthcoming Hollywood movie, sort of made them feel a bit warmer about the project. And I think that's when we thought, why don't we write some more songs and develop what was a sort of, you know, like just a bit of soundtrack work, which was amazing in itself. But it gave us the idea maybe to develop it into what could be our next album by having some songs on one side and instrumental on the other. So we sort of hybridized it and sort of made everyone happy, in inverted commas. And so that's what we did. Geffen got behind it. And, you know, we managed to create a kind of quite an interesting, unexpected sort of new record, you know. So it was a very good, for us, a really good point on our particular curve, you know. So yeah, and it went really well. It was very well received, and the film did sort of well theatrically in the first couple of weeks, but then fell away a little bit. But it became a big hit in the rental market. So there was a kind of quite a had a long term impact. You know, a slow burn a bit, but it was good. And To Live and Die in LA wasn't a massive hit, but again, it had this sort of slow burn effect, and it's endured. You know, like people like yourself, often many people say that's their favorite album of ours. You know, so it's definitely it's endured in a really good way, I think.
Yeah, it's just something so different between like Points and then Mosaic, and then you get this amazing soundtrack that's in the middle of it, and it's obviously 85 is like your big movie year because you also had Breakfast Club as well with Fire in the Twilight. I actually managed to get that played on my high school speakers in my final year, and I'm still very proud of that moment because it introduced the whole school to Wang Chung, and I'm like, it's a great song, Fire in the Twilight.
Yeah, we were playing it earlier on this year. Actually, we did a show with Billy Idol, and Billy Idol's producer Keith Forsey was the guy who produced that track for us, you know. And so that was quite an interesting crossing of paths after many years, you know. And that was it's cool to see Billy. You know, he was doing a great show.
Lovely, lovely. So now 1986, which many people believe this is the peak of the Chung. Mosaic, and like everybody have fun tonight, let's go. And obviously your appearance a year later on the Inner Space soundtrack with Hypnotize Me. So Mosaic, what was that like producing that fun album?
Well, I think what I was saying about To Live and Die in LA sort of was something of a liberation from the pressure of having to come up with, you know, pop hits, you know, for the record company. I think having gone through the process of To Live and Die in LA, I think that sort of cleansed our palate a little bit, if you like. I think it gave us something of the freedom to get back on the horse again and do something a bit more sort of, well, to cover the more pop side of what we do, but also not forgetting the other side, which, you know, with tracks like The World in Which We Live and stuff. So I think we went into Mosaic in a slightly more liberated sense, I think, and we changed producer, So we decided to work with Peter Wolf, who had been the keyboard player with Frank Zappa, who I'm a massive fan of. And Peter's kind of, he had a different type of energy, he's much more interested in sort of performance. I think, like with Jack's vocals, for example, from my perspective, I felt he got a much greater sense of performance out of Jack vocally, for example, and both of us in terms of our playing and everything. And there was a kind of, I don't know if you could say spontaneity about it. Maybe that's not quite the right word, but it was just a different sort of mentality going into that record with Peter's sort of very powerful energy. So I think, coming up, the fact that Mosaic turned out the way it did, I think was the combination of all those factors, And of course it became very successful in terms of singles,
Cool. Obviously, that was like at the height. I think like the US popularity always has been there. It's like that's your number one fan base is the USA. That's why you keep returning to the country time and time again, because Mosaic obviously did so well in America. So it really cemented the US fan base for what it is today.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose. Sorry, yeah, carry on.
I was just going to say, being signed to an American label for a British band is is unusual. Most British bands are signed to British labels and they break America at some point, or they don't. But we were signed to, actually in the US, so we didn't have a sort of proper label deal in the UK. And US record companies see, the US as the main territory. Obviously, they see Germany, Japan, and Australia as important territories. I mean, Nick knows much more about all this sort of stuff than I do, but I think the focus was very much on the US and not quite so worldwide. And I think working with Peter as well, he had a tremendous sensibility for the American market and created, Mosaic definitely was aimed right in the middle of sort of Hollywood Boulevard, wasn't it? It was like targeted very precisely. Yeah.
I think one very interesting thing that happened in those sessions for Mosaic was the fact that because normally we'll sort of write separately and then come together once things are a bit more down the road. We're quite sort of considered about things, or were at the time. And in the studio, it was we'd go in with all the repertoire written, But with Mosaic, or certainly with Everybody Have Fun Tonight, that pretty much came together in the studio and was one of the most spontaneous collaborations we've ever done, And to the point where we were sort of semi out of our comfort zone with it. We didn't even know for sure whether it was absolutely brilliant or absolutely terrible, because we were doing it so spontaneously with Peter very much involved in it, So it's a really good collaboration in the studio. But when our manager David came over we were recording it mostly in Austria, actually in Vienna, and so when David came over to see us and to hear our progress on the album. And then we played that to him, sort of not quite knowing how he was going to respond. He just went absolutely bonkers. I mean, he just loved it. He was jumping on the ceiling, dancing on the ceiling, to quote Lionel Richie. But, he was thrilled. I could see it was a huge hit. So that's it's interesting how these sort of things happen. And, for us, it was a bit of a departure.
Yeah, it was a big hit, so much so that it got featured on Beavis and Butthead. It feels like people say when you make it to Beavis and Butthead, you've made it.
Yeah. It made it on all sorts of things. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that reel that we put together of sort of punch. I mean, it's everything from The Simpsons to Beavis and Butthead to Austin Powers. I mean, it's just
SNL.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's incredible how it sort of permeated the culture, and still is, still is.
Yeah, the iconic music video as well, the whole stop motion frame idea, that was really
Yeah.
cool, and a very nice music video. And yeah, so 1987, you did the Inner Space soundtrack, at least you had an appearance with Hypnotize Me. Who reached out to you to ask for Hypnotize Me for the movie?
I'm not sure. These things tend to be done through our publishers, so it's a reasonably technical thing. But the movie, what do they call them? The music coordinators, would be obviously sifting through stuff and Hypnotize Me. I think did have a exactly the right flavor for that scene they wanted it in.
Yeah, that was
we weren't. Sorry, yeah, we weren't involved in that actively,
Yeah. I mean, yes, it fit the scene very well for what it was achieving. So obviously there must be something about it that was so good.
We've been very lucky over the years with movies being, movie directors and music coordinators, using our music in movies and sort of getting the juice out of it, if you like, And I guess there is something quite cinematic about some of the Wang Chung stuff. The production, especially for the time, was quite big, I suppose, ambitious, and the songs have a kind of a sort of presence about them that I think works well in cinema.
Yeah,
it's still,
agree.
we're still getting regular, usage of those songs. I mean, a few weeks ago we were in Family Guy, I forget which track. I think it's Everybody Have Fun Tonight, and then what's it called? South Park used Dancehall Days a few weeks before that, I think. So with Putin, the episode with Putin, but Vladimir Putin. So I mean, it's still very active. We're regularly in films, commercials, and TV shows. It's great.
Even making my work radio playlist quite regularly as well.
Good, thank you.
So yeah, it's great. So I work for a local supermarket company, and I think I hear the three big ones, which was Dance All Day, Let's Go, and Everybody Have Fun Tonight, regularly on college radio. So
great.
That's great. Thank you.
Australia still has the backing fan base for you guys.
Cool.
So I guess
I feel every time played there, it's always very warm response. Very,
Yeah. And then everything kind of went sort of downwards, if you will, in 1988, 1989 with the Warmer Side of the Cool. So obviously the only real single was Praying to a New God. I genuinely really love this song. I think it's my favorite single ever. And the fact that I haven't seen any live recordings of it or haven't even been brought back again in the recent years really shocks me.
Yeah, we've never ever played it live. I don't think ever once. But it was a difficult time because not a difficult time. It was when it came out, because of the nature of the lyric, or if you don't actually pay attention to what it's actually about, you can. I think, let's say, the Bible Belt stations in America,
yes,
sort of thought that it was an exhortation to not believe, to choose a different God from Jesus, or so they thought it was a sort of what's the word, like
anti-religious.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it wasn't specifically; it was more about consumerism, and but that really held it back. The pro, I think it just got buried, unfortunately. So, and then I suppose it was a slightly painful experience for us for it not to be successful. So I think maybe the association with those slightly difficult times for Wang Chung didn't inspire us to want to go out and play it, live. So that's probably why you never heard it. But maybe we should look at that. Another one we should maybe.
Yeah, or maybe just like some songs from Warm Side the Cool in general. I mean, there's some great ones. The B-side to that one, Tall Trees in a Blue Sky, would work really well. Just off the cuff there. And
Well, that was amazing to record that, because it's a great song. That's one of Jack's songs. But we had Vinnie Colaiuta, you know, the amazing drummer, Vinnie.
Yes, he's worked with Nick Kershaw, Tony Banks, all them guys.
And loads of people, and Jeff Beck and Sting, and Frank Zappa, of course. But he played on that track, you know, so, and it was just a joy working with him, wasn't it, Jack? We were just watching him just messing around, just warming up in the studio was a thrill, just watching him do that, let alone play with us.
Yeah, it was a real honor to be working with someone that good, really, you know, and his creativeness with, you know, the songs and stuff. He was in an interesting place, actually, because I guess he was coming out of a sort of phase of playing with virtuosic, jazz-oriented musicians, and I can remember him talking about, I just want to play some songs. Do you know what I mean? I just want to play Buff Bath and, you know, kind of just work, you know, be like a sort of artisan, you know, with the work, you know, supporting the songs rather than being the solo guy who's sort of everyone's just waiting for him to do amazing things, you know. But so it was, we caught him at a very good time, you know, where he was happy to just like play reasonably straightforward stuff, you know, in 4/4, and you know, he was happy with that.
I guess it was around the same time he was doing the works with Nick Kershaw, so that was also produced in America as well. At least that was recorded, some of it. But
and I think Sting as well. I think with whom he ended up playing more permanently. I think so. Wang Chung was Sting. Probably got confused about who the front man was. But, you
know. Jack was regularly mistaken, or not mistaken. People always used to say, "Oh, Jack to Jack, you look like Sting." You know? So that must have
say, no, he looks like me.
That annoyed you? Well, I remember someone going up to. We heard this story about someone going up to Sting one day saying, "Are you Jack Hues from Wang Chung?" So
in Camden Market. Very amusing.
That's a corker. I was going to remember what I was going to compare Praying to a New God to. Would you call that your dear God of XTC? Because you know how that was controversial in America as well, because it was pretty anti-religious.
Well, I think as Nick says, the song is not specifically anti-religious. It's more about, you know, taking the idea of a God as it manifests in consumerism, you know. Whereas I think Andy Partridge was much more philosophically questioning the whole idea of. So, we didn't go that deep, really.
Thank God, because the amount of stuff that he got for dear God, oh my Lord.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Still renowned to be. I appreciate his music, and I'm interviewing Dave Gregory after this episode. So,
great!
Any questions for him? I'm more than willing to take on
massive fan. Massive fans of XTC.
Dave Gregory came, and we were looking for musicians for, I think, one of our tours in, was it 87, 86? I can't remember. And I think he came and played with us, but, you know, we were just trying to get our band together. So he nearly was in Wang Chung for, you know.
Well, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
So obviously that the band that was seen on the Ritz live video, that's on YouTube, that was the band that you're talking about, right?
Yes, exactly. That was it. You know better than us. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So we moved to around, you guys get back together in the 2000s, you do a whole bunch of stuff, but Taser comes out 2013, first time recording material since 1989 that is brand new. What did you put forward maybe that was previous in the 80s that maybe you brought along to give it that Wang Chung flavor? So it was like familiar in a way to your audience.
Actually, sorry, can I pick you up on a detail there? It wasn't actually the first time we recorded since the 80s.
Oh, of course, Space Joke.
That's right.
Space Joke in 97.
98.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Just did that. No, don't worry. But that was again fairly spontaneous. I think at the time I was working at Warner Brothers as an A&R guy, and we weren't really active together. Well, we were active in the sense that Jack would produce some of the bands I was working with when I was at Warner's, but we weren't actively Wang Chunging together. But we heard that, you know, our greatest hits was going to be coming out on Universal. So we sort of approached them and said, "Do you fancy? What if we did a new track for you? Would you be interested in that?" And they were like, "Yeah, we'd love that." So we did. So Space Junk was again quite spontaneous. It was a whole. We did that very quickly. We worked with Adam Wren, you know, the producer of Left Field, and we did that pretty quickly. It turned out really well. They were very happy to put it on the record, and then of course it's went on to be used in much later in Walking Dead, you know, the TV show, twice in fact. You know,
Oh, wow.
So yeah.
That again is another interesting thing, you know, that Frank Darabont, who did, I assume he did all the Walking Dead, but certainly that first episode, apparently he always conceived of that episode closing with Space Junk, you know, before he'd really started writing the thing, as I understand it, you know. So once again, we seem to get into the minds of film people, you know, in a quite a cool way, and that's basically a very obscure track to be choosing as well, you know. So we're very fortunate that happened.
Question for Jack about Strictly Inc. Now, Tony Banks is my keyboard hero. I first picked up a musical instrument thanks to him and his work in early Genesis. I remember the days as a 14-year-old trying to cipher through Apocalypse and 9/8 on keyboard and failing miserably. Working with such a mastermind for the only album with Strictly Inc., what was it like finally working with Tony Banks out of Genesis? I mean, that's pretty cool.
It was very cool, yeah. Like you, I was a huge early Genesis fan, you know, the Peter Gabriel Genesis. And yeah, a huge admirer of Tony's work, you know, Watcher of the Skies and Firth of Forth and all those things, you know. So yeah, I sort of met him at the studio. I think maybe I did a couple of demos for him or something. But essentially, after Wang Chung split up, Nick and I both did solo records. Nick did his Promised Land album, and I did one as well with a producer called Nick Davis. And Nick Davis was working on all the Genesis remasters around that time. So it was Nick who suggested me to Tony as a possible singer. And so maybe I did a demo, or maybe we just met, but we sort of got on really well, actually, because Tony's, how do you describe Tony? He's very sort of sharp, but he's very clear about what he wants, you know, and he likes things to be precise, I suppose, you know, and I was able to sort of deliver that for him, you know, and also he likes, well, he sort of couldn't be bothered to write lyrics for some of the songs, you know. He'd sort of made a start, and so I finished off some of the lyrics. So I was just generally useful to him at that time, I think. But we've remained friends, you know, and last year we went to a concert in London together. We go and see orchestral concerts because, of course, he's super interested in classical music and orchestral records, as am I, you know. So we went to see some Richard Strauss, and which blew his mind, actually. It was great.
I guess you could consider An Island in the Darkness your own Supper's Ready, because it's the long song. It goes for about 17 minutes, and it's built up really well with this amazing piano composition by Tony Banks. So,
yeah. Now, a lot of Genesis fans are big fans of that particular solo album by Tony. I think they think it's the one that's closest to a sort of Genesis record, you know. So, and I felt very honoured to be singing on that and just working with him, you know, and being part of that whole fraternity of personalities and musicians, you know, their crew and stuff are great people. And Tony invited me along to the very last gig they did at the O2 in London. That was just before Christmas, I think, or maybe just after. And that was an amazing occasion, you know, seeing them playing to this massive audience, you know, all totally committed fans, knowing that it's the last show. And I know a lot of people were sort of saying, well, Phil is, you know, not well and under par, but I thought he was really compelling, actually. And even though to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of the Phil Collins version of Genesis. I say that. I mean, I like some of it, but listening to them play that live, and you got how great the songwriting is, the craftsmanship, and what a force they are. So it's a great honor to be around that and part of it in a peripheral sort of way.
Yeah, tracks like, I don't know, when you said like you kind of like you're not a fan of Phil Collins stuff, but like it's there. I mean, tracks like Fading Lights is a phenomenal song from a really later years Genesis album, and obviously that was played on the final tour, so
yeah,
great one
yeah,
indeed.
Yeah,
Australia, sorry.
I was going to say he was great, very compelling to watch. Even though he was minimal in his movements, and he somehow convinced you that he was everything that you'd want him to be. Somehow it was quite a magic trick that you were watching. It's great.
Yes. So you've got Wang Chung finally hit shores in Australia in late 2010s, but without you, but with Nick.
Yes.
So This one's for Nick. So made to Australia, what did you think of us as a receiving audience after all these years of waiting?
I mean, it was a double whammy for me, double wangy. I mean, I hadn't ever really performed Wang Chung without, obviously to do it without Jack was a huge sort of deal for me. I was quite very nervous about it. I'd never done it before. To do it, because Jack had basically decided to step back for a few years. I think he'd had enough of the touring for a while. So, and I'd really been enjoying it. So I wanted to continue. Jack gave his blessing to that. And so I was very nervous about that. Would it be accepted? And also to do it in Australia, where we hadn't played since the end of the 80s. So for a long time, not having played, didn't know how well Australia would respond. So it was quite nerve-wracking, but it turned out really well. The crowds were good, good sized crowds. They're very responsive, and it was a lot of fun, and everyone on the tour got along really well. So, I sort of was extremely relieved. I mean, I thought maybe, was his name, Nick from Cutting Crew, Nick Van Eed from Cutting Crew. I thought it would be good to get a singer to do Jack's parts, of someone who I knew could sing properly and could properly perform and was of a good caliber. And Nick was sort of up for it, and we did some rehearsing, but he became a bit unwell a few weeks before the tour was supposed to start, which really, as you can imagine, that really sort of did my head in. So, but he said, why don't you try Gareth, his guitar player, Gareth Moulton. He can sing really well, and he's a great guitar player. And we'd met Gareth sort of when we'd been on tour in 2010, when we toured with the Cutting Crew. So I said, okay, let's try that. So I got together with Gareth, and he was great. He was really into what we were doing. Was very respectful of the legacy that, of not sort of kind of trying to deliver something of a sufficient quality, and he was great. So thank God it all worked out well, and we spent a few years working together, whilst Jack was doing his other things, and it was a lot of fun. But Jack eventually decided to see the light and come back to his family. So, and so we're back again, and it's very enjoyable.
Is there any plans on the cards maybe next year if we're lucky enough Australia might see you guys again? Because that points 84 really kind of is 40 years in 2024.
Yeah, I think there's very good will towards Wang Chung. So, I mean, obviously the people who are promoting the two tours that I did there, in recent years, I'm sure would be very happy to have us back, with Jack. So it's just a question of organising it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a very good chance that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting Nick Kershaw just across the ditch in New Zealand, and we're getting Human League for the Dare 2024 tour, so really anything's possible.
Cool.
Well, we
really
should look into it.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So, yeah, do you want to see my Wang Chung vinyl? I mean, I've got everything that I have here.
Sure.
Okay.
I have 2 copies of Points on the Curve because one of them has bent vinyl, so warped.
Yeah.
So my first copy had a warped vinyl, and that was bought off eBay, $15. So I had to go out and find a replacement, but the replacement was phenomenal and plays so well. So very much my introduction to Wang Chung there. My first single, I believe, I picked up probably was "Let's Go." There, I have that one. There we go.
Oh, cool.
And backed with, of course, "The World in Which We Live In."
You look a bit young aren't you a bit young for all of this?
I get that almost, yes. I'm raised in a household with 1980s music playing 24/7, so it's been rooted with me as long as I can remember listening to music from a young age. So I'm blessed.
That's great. That's great. We love it when younger people are appreciating what we do and what we've done.
Yes. I mean, I've met Steve Hackett as well. I met him on his last tour here in Australia. He signed my copy of Highly Strung, which is nicely in the Cremisa Years box set that came out a few years ago as well. So Genesis was my first introduction to progressive rock as a whole. So there you go, there's that. And I am also aware of the Canterbury prog scene that is very synonymous around where you guys grew up and all that. Caravan, National Health, all them guys. So were you aware of that at all, like before the Wang Chung years, obviously?
I wasn't particularly, but I think Nick certainly was. Yeah.
I was a massive fan of the Canterbury scene. I love Soft Machine, Hatfield in the North. I was totally into that. That was in the sort of, early 70s through onwards. But then Jack's very much taken the baton over and it's really, I think you even played a gig with Soft Machine, didn't you, Jack? A few years ago.
A few years ago, a sort of new incarnation, but nevertheless, they are the genuine Soft Machine that's out on the road if you go see them, and Caravan as well. So with original members. So Caravan were headlining. I think we were first out, but it was a thrill to be asked to do that, and it's an interesting hybrid, the Canterbury scene, because whereas Genesis is a sort of, I think Genesis and were a sort of blend of classical music and rock music mainly, the Canterbury scene is much more the blend of jazz and rock music, and that was a whole new territory for me. That when I remember working with Peter Wolf, who, as Nick says, had worked with Frank Zappa, and the guys in Frank Zappa's band were also in Miles Davis's band. There was quite a lot of throughput, and Peter talking to me about Miles sometime, and I was kind of like, I don't really know Miles Davis. He was like, what? I remember him taking me out in his Mercedes and playing me Nefertiti, which is a mid 60s Miles album, and I sort of liked it. I really liked it, but I didn't love it, if you know what I mean. I did go out and buy it and played it, but it wasn't until the mid 90s, that for some reason the whole jazz thing clicked into place for me, and I became a massive sort of addict of Miles, Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk especially as well, and particularly their approach to composition, which is so much freer and kind of open-ended than the thinking in rock music and classical music as well, So but it grew when I moved to Canterbury, which was around about the year 2000. I met some local musicians and started working with them, and that's where my sort of interest really got rooted in in the sort of Canterbury sound and that sort of proggy, jazzy thing. And working, Chris Hues, who produced Dance All Days, helped me produce 2 of my Canterbury prog jazz albums in around about 2006, 7. I think it was around that sort of time. And so it was lovely to work with Chris again. And so it's interesting how all these different influences, different musicians take you to different places, and you get to work with them on all the different projects. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I myself am also a fan of the jazz fusion side. So Dave Stewart obviously went on to do Bruford UK. So all those great acts. I'm a big fan of his a big fan of Bruford's drumming, obviously. I'm a drummer, so big props to them, and also a big fan of Costin's work on Chung with the Simmons.
Yeah.
Love me those electronic drums, and I wish Darren would come back sometime and perform with you guys again like he did in 2013, 2014.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as I say, never say never.
Be great to have that reunion around about 2024. So if you guys go on tour again in the US for Celebrating Points of the Curve, it'd just be like really full circle.
Yeah, it would be.
There's lots of things, we're thinking about doing. So it's there's lots of ideas floating around. So you never know, babe, as they used to say in LA in the 80s.
I believe on the US tour, correct me if I'm wrong, was your keyboardist with you Adrian Lee from Micah Mechanics?
He was for a while.
Yeah, we played with Adrian Lee. Yeah, he played. I think that was in the very early 80s. He played with us. We toured with Toyah and the Human League. We did UK tours, and I think we supported Toyah, and he was the keyboard player, and then we got to know him there with that, and so I think he came on the Human League tour with us, didn't he, Jack? And did some other gigging with. So that was early 80s. That was, but and then after that he wasn't available for another tour, and we found Graham Pleath, who had been playing with Mike Oldfield, and he.
Yeah, you've frozen there, Nicky.
Yeah.
So I'll carry that on.
Yeah.
Graham Pleath, sort of joined us for the 84 American tour with the Cars, and I think he sort of started the following year, and then he in turn was replaced as well, wasn't he? So, well.
Yes.
Am I still frozen?
No, you're all good now.
You're back.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just listening to a bit of Mike Oldfield myself today, actually. So I got recently into his music around 2022. I think I started collecting his vinyl. I think the first one I got was Discovery from 1984. So I think that might have featured that keyboardist you mentioned on the Discovery tour, unless he was already stuck with you guys around. Mike did his tour of Europe.
Yeah.
With that album, so whatever it may be.
Sure.
Anyways, unless you have any burning questions for me, because I'm always open to questions from my guests about anything to do with your music or just anything in general.
You sort of covered most stuff.
Yeah, you seem to know more about us than we do, so yeah, we can ask you. No, I mean, I'm just been. You seem to know your stuff, which is very nice. So
it's always good to know that I'm well researched for a podcast. There's been some times where I haven't felt where I've been well researched, but I have. So that's great to know.
That's all good. Yeah.
Whereabouts are you based? Where are you?
I am in Mountainede, which is a regional suburb on the Surf Coast Highway, so which is near Torquay, and it's in the major regional suburb of Geelong. So basically a regional suburb somewhere in Victoria in Australia.
Okay.
So I usually have to travel out to the main CBD in Melbourne if I want to see gigs.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But it's worth the trip.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, that
what sort of distance are you talking about to see a gig? Like a couple of 100 miles, is it, or not that far?
probably like an hour and a bit by car. I started using train more often
Oh,
to get out there because obviously it's much better, and obviously saving the planet with emissions and all that. So that's good. I did see Phil Collins when he was last here in Australia on the Not Dead Yet tour, and like you said, he played phenomenal. He sung really well for his age, so just goes to show.
indeed.
And then at the end of the year, I'm seeing Kraftwerk.
Great.
Oh,
A big box set of all of their stuff recently, which I've been wading through because I wasn't that familiar with it, apart from the singles and stuff. But yeah, interesting. Very interesting.
yeah, very interesting band.
Yeah.
They're really the forefront of what was to become in the 80s, like with Gary Newman and all those electronic bands.
Incredibly very influential. Yeah.
And real pioneers as well, I was a massive fan of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who's the sort of avant-garde German electronic artist, I suppose, in the 60s and 70s. But I can hear his influence to a degree in terms of the sounds that they use, the sort of pure sine waves and stuff. And, it's interesting, that kind of German connection in electronic music.
Yeah. I particularly do love their first three albums that haven't been remastered at all whatsoever. They're very much different to what they would be well known for. The Kraftwerk 1, 2, and Ralph und Floren. They're more prog, if you will, than they are the other stuff. So
great.
Yeah. Well, I guess that is it pretty much. I have no more questions, and
chatting for an hour, so I think
it's been great fun.
Wonderful.
Cool. Well, thanks for your interest.
Yeah, and thanks for persisting in getting it organized as well.
Hey, that's quite all right.